And the establishment says, Kambuga Shakamunda, Kunga Kingo, Booga Laka Bluga Black, 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 Black.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
It's a slogan we should put on the t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift.
Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Andy, how you doing?
Oh, well, thanks, Roger. I'm going to hit you with something pretty out there.
Oh.
I literally, just before we hit record, watched a video where I heard two dog trainers. They're actually police dog trainers, and they were talking to this guy who was asking some, curious questions. They said to him, yes, this dog is in training. However, the dog, she's in season, or what was that? Is it in season? Is that the word?
Yeah, season or in heat.
In heat or whatever. And so we're not really training her at the moment. And I literally had to Google what is this concept, right? Because I've never owned dogs. I've never heard of that though.
Like in pop culture,
I had a sense of what it meant. Like I could put together what it meant in the context, but I wanted to check it, so I Googled it, and it did make me think. Like when you take away all of the social conventions around what you can and can't say. Just how like that what I had found, it was so outrageous. When a dog is in season, it refers to a female dog being in estrus or heat, the stage in her reproductive cycle when she is fertile and ready to mate. This period usually lasts about 2 to 4 weeks and can occur every 6 months, depending on the breed. In terms of training, this phase can affect the dog's behavior in several ways. 1. Distraction. The dog's focus may be compromised due to hormonal changes, making her more easily distracted during training sessions. 2. Changes in behavior. Some dogs become more anxious, restless, or irritable during this time, which can interfere with obedience training and learning new skills. 3. Reduced energy. A dog in season might have fluctuating energy levels, either becoming lethargic or alternatively more excitable. 4. Social interactions. Dogs in season may attract the attention of male dogs, which can make training in public or around other dogs more challenging due to distractions from both the female and surrounding males. Some trainers choose to temporarily adjust or reduce training intensity during this period or focus on less demanding activities until the dog is out of season and back to a more balanced state.
You going to leave it there?
I'll let you dig your hole.
No, come on, don't do this to me.
Okay, all right, fair enough. If we can talk about that so objectively for some mammals, do you sense that there's any differences in our ability to talk about that for other mammals?
This is I just want to pause for a second because talk about a hardball question. Can you imagine if you asked Trump or Kamala Harris this? They would literally I think Kamala Harris would literally explode. Would just smoke had started coming out of her ears, and then she would explode, and then Trump would actually just give the most insanely ridiculous answer to this. But look,
they're eating the dogs.
This is why they're eating the dogs, but not during heat. I think that the I'm going to try to thread this one right. So, all right, let me start with something like a little bit softer. Okay, like a soft landing with this, right? Okay, so it should not be controversial to say that, take menstruation, right? Women who are experiencing the lead up to their period and the hormone shifts that go along with that have real and significant effects to their mental state, their physical state, and that has an impact on their life during that period. And for some women less, some women more, but that is a real thing. And like I think that shouldn't be a controversial thing to point out. Now, I know it's really tricky because anything mood driven, and essentially these hormones kind of change your mental state and your mood and all this kind of stuff. That's really, really tricky, right? Because it's weaponized against them in times gone by in a very, very misogynistic way. Like as soon as, a woman behaves in a way that a man doesn't like, they just like, oh, or they're grumpy. It's like, oh, they're on their rags or something like that. Like that used to fly as an insult back in the day. And that's what makes this whole subject really tricky, right? But it is a real thing. And like, it doesn't even have to be, so we're talking about, say, like a menstruation and that kind of thing, right? That happens once every 1 week, every 28 days or whatever. 28 days later, is that what that was about? But, you could also talk about a lot more prolonged version of that in perimenopause and menopause, right? So, yeah, I think it's like, and the reason it's so hard to talk about, I suppose, is because of all this misogynistic past behind it, and the way it was weaponized. But I think that I'm hoping that, that kind of thing can be spoken about a bit more openly in today's society, right? Yeah. Did you have a reason why you were looking this dog training instructions up?
So I have no agenda, and of course I'm not. Humans and dogs are quite different. So I don't think that we can make too much of it. But I just thought that some of the language was interesting.
Well, actually, and you can always trust the nerds, right? Because the nerds will inherit the earth. So if I wasn't a big Star Trek-y kind of guy, but on Star Trek, famously, they have certain races of aliens that experience the same kind of thing. And like the Vulcans, right? Like the Vulcans, which are an alien race, like Spock, the most famous one. The Vulcans have this thing where they only mate once every 7 years. But it's a similar thing where I believe that, the women experience, like they go into heat and it's like they must mate, right? Like it's like they're compelled to, and it's like a hormonal, pheromonal thing. And so they've kind of like copied that thing with dogs, and have and from morpized it into like this alien race, right? Interesting concept though. Imagine if that was the case for humans, where you didn't have to, like, you just didn't think about sex at all for like years at a time, and then there was just like a 1 month period where it's like you had to, and like it was just like, oh, and maybe they do it by country, like Spain fucks on January, and like like the Australians fuck in September, and it's just you just like you only
God, the Women's World Cup is really getting out of whack here.
Yeah, the Olympic Village, but it just happens once every 2 years or something. Man, we'd be so much more productive. But yeah, it's interesting, and the whole dog and bitch thing doesn't help either. It does not help. Yeah, so that one's definitely a minefield.
All right, I'll rescue us from ourselves, or from me. Today's episode, we're going to talk about conspiracy theories and a little bit about, how they come about, what the motivating factors behind them are, who's inclined to fall into the traps of a conspiracy theory, and maybe even to flip it on its head a little bit and take a generous view of conspiracy theories as well, to acknowledge that sometimes some things are a conspiracy and they're true. So I guess maybe out of between 1 and 10, how would you rate yourself as someone inclined to be intrigued or interested in conspiracy theory ideas?
Yeah. Well, Andy, I think that I'm someone who loves, like, I'm interested in extreme things and interesting things, right? So I'm naturally gravitate towards the theater and the academic exercise of a good conspiracy theory. and I like being drawn into the narrative and the intrigue around it. But I'm also naturally very skeptical. I'm very distrusting of information. But when it comes to conspiracy theories, that's something that can actually cross over a boundary where you become distrustful of all things, which means that somehow you let in the possibility for some conspiracy theories as well. So I think on the whole, I would say that I don't really believe in many of the well-known conspiracy theories, but I am attracted to them like a moth to a flame in terms of the entertainment value. And also I do generally distrust mainstream narratives as well. So I always think that there's something a little bit more to it. So I think I'm kind of in the middle there. What about yourself?
I think I think we've probably, not to pull up like the whole Trump debate that we've had over the last several weeks, but I think in some ways I see this as a little bit of almost like a reflection of that, because I think I'm a lot more trusting of like the orthodox view or assessment of things than you are. So, and there's like other things in this podcast too, like with COVID vaccines and things like that, where I've been a lot more willing to go with like, oh no, like the official advice is this, or the long-running trusted, institutions of government suggest this or whatever. And I think I'm a lot more trusting than you, is my sense. And not necessarily that means I'm less inclined to fall into the trap of like believing a conspiracy theory than you, but like I think my inclination is to be a lot more kind of like hug the official advice or hug the official line. I mean, I love contrarian views, so I'm definitely a contrarian. However, I think at the same time I have respect for institutions, and I can see like that, when NASA says it landed a man on the moon, that it actually did land, a man. Not, of course, not saying you think otherwise, but yeah, I don't think there's this this big problem going on, right?
I think that I would describe it less about. I don't think I would say that you're trusting. I would say that you respect elite opinion, and you have a view that most things are driven by systems rather than a conspiracy of bad actors or a kind of cabal of small but powerful factions that kind of have nefarious kind of motives.
Wait, the cabal, is that the pizza, like the people with the pizza parlor and the...
Manouche. So I kind of think of it more that way. I think you're a believer in that emergence of consensus and elite institutions and things like that. And I am generally more distrustful. And I often think, when I think about our conflicts, our discussions, I do think that probably maybe you have a little bit more faith in humanity as well, or you think that actually there's less evil in the world, and most of the evil that comes out is due to systemic and circumstantial things that are subtle and bend the will of, produce behavior in spite of a conscious kind of evil in the world. And I'm more likely, I have a more negative view of humanity in that way. Not to get too deep, but I do think that there are bad actors in the world, and they try to have a disproportionate influence on their motives and their will in the world.
Hey man, Donald Trump.
But yeah, I mean, and I actually think COVID, I don't want to go too near, because I do think that
we'll stay out of that.
COVID was I think that conspiracy theories and COVID, none of the things that I talk about are what I would define as a conspiracy theory. Like maybe there is a definitional problem here that actually I think back when we were growing up, conspiracy theories were proper tinfoil hat shit. Like we're talking UFOs, we're talking, aliens and UFOs and Area 51 and all these kind of things, right? And like X-Files stuff, But nowadays it's like, everyone who doesn't believe the vaccine thing is a conspiracy theorist, right? Like I think that it's been watered down over time, and the problem with conspiracy theories is if they're not extreme enough, naturally, just by over the course of time, a lot of conspiracy theories are proven to be true. And then that only has the effect of attracting more conspiracy theorist enthusiasts. to the fold, right? And I think that there's a danger of that happening too.
Okay, well, to like invent a bespoke definition of conspiracy theories for the purpose of like this episode, is it like a reasonable working definition to kind of say it's like something where there's the real reason something happens, and then there's like the fake made up reason that's like communicated to the rest of the world that like is the orthodox view of why something's the case, but there's really actually this other completely different rationale or reason that's been made up. And like there's a bit of architecture that's happened in terms of like brainwashing the public or getting them to come to believe the prevailing narrative of a topic.
Yeah, it involves like, I think it always involves some kind of cover up by an institution of power that diverts the true motive of what that institution wants to achieve. And let's be honest, it's always like in a negative way, right? It's always a manipulation of the public for some kind of end goal that is not in the best interest of the people, right? So I think that to me describes most conspiracy theorists, right? It's some kind of hidden evil, right? It's some kind of perversion of justice, some cover up, right? Or something that we have a secret, we have this power, this secret that we do not trust the people with.
Yeah. I think like it's worth going into like the psychology of like, so people who gravitate to conspiracy theory thinking that look at the prevailing narrative and try and work out, well, actually, how is it maybe not correct? Where that's their instinct. I think there is a common suite of like psychological, touch points that they have. I think, one would be like epistemic insecurities. So these are people who don't feel confident to, trust what they're told. Like they're people who maybe have had in the past an experience that, that maybe has caused them to have mistrust in experts. So
yeah,
they're people who maybe don't respect power or authority, or maybe they have like legitimately, they do have a grievance. Like,
yeah, or experience some kind of persecution from institutions.
Yeah. And I think that encourages that thinking of like, hey, if you can't trust that, let's say something like as simple as the police, if you can't trust that the police are there to help you and protect you, as in you think the police are out to get you, then you can't trust anything. Like, what can you trust?
Yeah.
And I think it's like for most of us, we work within like the realms of the 80-90% of society that, the systems and institutions that we have work with us rather than against us. But there's like 10 to 20% of society who in some way or another feel impeded by those institutions. It happens very slowly and gradually. It doesn't happen just like overnight. It happens you lose people quite gradually, I think.
It is really tough, right? Because there's a little bit of like a Plato's cave situation, right? That when you have a distrust of a narrative and an anxiety about it, and you're proven right in some way, whether personally, like a small sample kind of issue where you've proven something yourself by your own lived experience, or other things have fallen into place just because of the random nature of the world. Some theories get proven right or wrong. You feel like you've been freed from Plato's cave, right? Like you have understood that you're only looking at shadows and now you see the real world, right? You've kind of thrown off the shackles and you feel enlightened, right? And you feel like you have this knowledge that no one else has. But if you tell other people, they may not be ready for it, or they may kind of turn against you, which is the whole Plato's cave thing, right? And I see that I see that kind of play out with people who are deep in this space, right? They want to tell you, about the secret, but they also are nervous. They're always nervous about it because they don't know whether you'll accept it or you'll turn on them. But I think that the biggest thing you've described really is that distrust. It's this kind of distrust of authority and the motives of big institutions. And I see that sometimes extend to things like science as well, right? Like usually it's a distrust of the scientific method or the general kind of progress of science, or and a good thing would be like at some point in time, science thought it was all good to put lead in everything, right? And we've obviously paid a huge price for our proliferation of lead in all our products, right? There's been people that have had neurological damage and all sorts of things. And there are things like that where it was actually just this distrust because of a real event that was based in like a scientific discovery of some sort, right? And that's where I think that it plants all these seeds of conspiracy thinking and people that are susceptible to it. But I would say that I would distinguish between a true conspiracy theorist who has these distrusts and anxieties and things. I distinguish them. They have this kind of cleverness or this analytical ability to think about things in an alternative way compared to just a complete woo-woo hippie, right? Like I don't think the same people who think that crystals provide energy and like a charge by the moon, right? Like they're not that cross-section of the population are not conspiracy theorists in my mind. Like, because you do need to be switched on in a different way, I think. It's not just this kind of blind, like I believe in fucking, woo-woo.
I was going to ask you, do you think there's an average, like if IQ is as good as we've got to like a corollary of like intelligence or something like that, do you think there's like a distribution at play here where, and you sort of answered it, I think in some ways in that you said actually smart people can be conspiracy theorists. And I think that's can be true. Like I think you can, in some ways, for some conspiracy theories, you need to be very smart to convince yourself and think that you're the smartest person in the room such that only you can see it. Like there's a certain kind of degree of like that has to be your norm, like to be able to then take on your own view of the world of things. Whereas maybe if you're a bit of a sheep rather than a leader, like you follow the prevailing view. But I don't know, like you mentioned like the crystal thing, and I'm thinking like, I think there's probably a high correlation between people who. Do
you think? Because I don't think that.
Well, I think that the people who say like stuff about like 5G and all that sort of stuff and like crystals, like I'd say there's like a pretty big overlap.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of put more hopes behind the IQ element. Like I think it's actually the human cognitive function misfiring, right? So like we're constantly looking for pattern recognition, and so conspiracy theorists are a broader sense of us seeing patterns where like erroneous patterns, right? And we're trying to make sense of things that are actually much more random.
I think there's a lot of like motivated reasoning going on though. Like there's a lot of, it helps me to believe this thing. I mean, like pretty much the whole of Russia at the moment is under like this situation of like, it makes us feel good to think that, Ukraine's full of Nazis because that kind of makes us feel less guilty about this terrible, invasion of Ukraine,
Maybe I'm talking about the culture of conspiracy theorists, though. You know what I mean? Like I don't think I'm generalizing it to this idea of maladaptive thought or being manipulated by propaganda or something. Like I'm actually thinking the type of tinfoil conspiracy theorist. It's like a cult. It's like there's a culture there, right? And they are people who are drawn to complicated things, right? Like it's almost like the perversion or the antithesis of like Occam's razor, right? Like when you hear hoof prints, you should think horse, not zebra. But conspiracy theorists think zebra, right? They like the hallmark of a good conspiracy theory is it's always more complicated than the simple obvious answer. Like it's always and to get to that level of complication. All I'm saying is you need a certain level of like cognition and analysis that you have to craft in your head, right? It has to get away from you.
But I think if the critical question is like, on average, are they more or less in touch with their intelligence than those who don't buy into it? Like I'd struggle to sort of buy into that. Like I would agree that like probably the most dangerous people in the world in the history of mankind have been in that category that you've thought about, in terms of like they get misguided by ideas like eugenics or like thinking about like Hitler and that kind of thing, where they have extreme ideas but then they don't have anyone that can kind of pull them up on it, and they're very confident they perceive themselves to be the smartest person in the room, and then they don't accept anyone's like alternate view. But I think that's a little bit different to conspiracy thinking. Like I think the unique factor behind conspiracy theorists essentially is like a bias, right? It's like a bias towards the more interesting and exciting exploration
the
for
more
something.
Elaborate.
Yeah, like the thing that's like, wouldn't that be like incredible if that actually were the case? Like,
yeah.
And a good example of that is with COVID and like the lab leak theory, right? Where actually the smartest sort of, objectively smartest intellectuals and all that were like hosing down the lab leak theory early on. They were saying, oh, look, yeah, okay, there's a, I don't know, whatever the lab in Wuhan, and it looks a little bit coincidental, but but that's just conspiracy thinking.
Why is it called the Wuhan coronavirus lab?
the Wuhan COVID-19 lab. How did they know? But I guess just as an aside, I think that's an example where the default approach of the smartest people was to just assume that must be a conspiracy theory. Therefore, I'm not going to believe it, as opposed to, oh, wouldn't that be amazing if that were true? That just makes total sense. So maybe it's the default is to apply the critical thinking lens, or okay, if we're going to be making these sorts of claims, we really, really need to be crossing the T's and dotting the I's on our evidence. Whereas conspiracy theorists love talking about shit without evidence, and there's a slight difference there.
Yeah, no, that's true. I guess we're talking about, empiricism versus theories, unsubstantiated theories, right? Everyone has their own bar for what they will believe, what they need to believe something. But I think honestly, for the average person, that bar is very, very low. So really, you're talking about a very small section of society that are bothering to have, devote time to deep thinking about a certain issue, and to actually get the mind to say, this is the situation, I'm going to have some level of divergent thinking to come up with alternate theories, right? The only difference is a scientist will actually, those theories will be hypotheses, and they will actually test them, right? And they'll test them and try to get significant results, and they'll have a framework to kind of weed out the chaff, while conspiracy theorists will just say, hey, this theory actually sounds good, so I'm going to just run with it, and good being exciting and enticing, and or whatever it is. But hey, look, I don't want to, I think that, again, we have to be honest with ourselves. Most people don't have a framework for thinking like that. We just are apathetic about things. We'll go with the mainstream thing, and we won't think about it much, right? And if we're wrong, then we're safe in numbers. Everyone's wrong.
Think for a moment. What would you say the most, if you could describe any thought or prevailing belief that you hold, what would be the closest to a conspiracy theory that you hold right now that you're willing to share?
Well, I'll give a more egregious example. When I was in my 20s, there was a short period of my life where I looked at the evidence of the moon landing, and I just thought, no, it just doesn't feel right. This shit didn't happen, right? They can't even. They're telling me they had calculator computing power, and they managed to fire a rocket and somehow managed to land it on the moon, actually even find the moon and actually land it there. And then they've got pictures that they've somehow sent back with signals when you can't even get a phone signal back in the day. And so I just had these kind of thoughts in my head where it's you know what? No, I'm not believing this. There's not, it seems so hard for me to believe. And the footage and all this kind of stuff, it looks like it's shot in a studio. And yeah, for a while I was just I don't know if I believe this is the case. And there are motives of why it was important for the US to land a man on the moon and all this kind of stuff before the Russians. And I just thought, yeah, it's actually, if I'm honest with myself, the only reason I'm believing this is because people are saying it's true. I actually don't, the evidence laid before me, I'm obviously not intelligent enough to understand it. The motives don't seem aligned, and I actually don't think I believe it. So that was probably the biggest, the biggest thing where I was the moon landing is not real, when I was in my early 20s. And I think I held that view for not strongly enough to tell anyone about it.
We have now.
Well, I have everyone now. But yeah, if you can't be foolish in your early 20s, when can you be?
I've got to admit though, there's something appealing about that being true though. There's something intrinsically, there's intrinsic benefit in contemplating that was all made up.
But see what I mean, right? Most people would laugh at me for admitting that, but those people never even thought about it. They just believed it. And if you just believe that we can somehow in the 60s shoot a rocket and hope for the best and hit a moving landmass that we can't even see, and nothing's ever done it before, with no computers and digital technology, and land it, actually not just crash it like a missile into the moon, land it properly and send back footage and somehow get them the fuck back, then maybe people can feed you other bullshit that you don't understand. If that bar is so low for you that it's oh yeah, I accept it. Yeah. There's a place called NASA, and they have rockets.
Well, not only that, but we haven't done it since.
Yeah, we haven't done it since. And at the time, it's like you can't like get a big telescope and look at the moon and look at the flag up there.
Yeah.
Right? There's a bunch of stuff like that where it's like, okay, laugh at me all you want, but what's your barrier? Like, sorry, what's your bar for proving this is real? And if you don't have one, then what else? How gullible can you be about other things?
I mean, last week we did an episode on Joe Rogan. Do you think it would be worthwhile now having a look at having a tour, shall we say, around the 5 top conspiracy theories considered by
Let's have the
guests
experience
on the JRE?
All right, hit me.
All right. Well, you'll like number 1. So number 1 is the moon landing hoax. So some guests like Eddie Bravo have speculated that the 1969 moon landing was faked by the US government as part of the Cold War space race, suggesting that the technology at the time wasn't advanced enough for such a feat.
I mean, I think I've already spilled the beans on this one. And
next,
the funny thing is, like, even though this was meant to be something that I did hold, like, even just talking about it out loud, it G'd me up to actually like believing it a bit more again. but the only thing that kind of counteracts that if it was pure propaganda, then why wouldn't the Russians have done it earlier? Probably comes to mind.
So I think with the moon landing, for one, like, for all the reasons you've said, it's an absolute, like, amazing thing that we achieved that. Like, as a human species, that we were able to do that is, like, incredible. So it's not surprising that this is, like, one of the most, like, conspiracy theorized topics. So you mentioned, like, we didn't have the technology. I said, oh, well, we didn't do it again. I think a lot of that stuff is like you just figure out how you can do it within the technology that you have, and it's not surprising that you don't do it again because the costs are high and all that sort of stuff.
And they all came back alive.
Yeah, well, they wouldn't have. I mean, they did have multiple missions to send people, like humans, into space.
Apollo 13, I suppose.
So I believe we went to the moon. Okay. And for me, the number one factor that, like, precludes any notion that it was a conspiracy theory is the fact that you would have to have so many people. There's so many people who would have had to go along with the lie. So it's not just like Neil Armstrong. There's the whole control center. There's like, it's literally thousands of people that would have had to go along with the lie. And it's just not possible. Humans can't do that shit. So I think that for me is, like, pretty compelling. And I think it's amazing. I think we did it. And yeah.
Yeah, look, let me be clear. I do believe now we have been to the moon. But I'm just saying that there are a lot of, like, you have to be honest with yourself. There are a lot of questions that you would have if you thought about it for more than 10 seconds. You do not have satisfactory answers to them, right? Like, how did they get the signal back? Tell me.
Well, they did. It just took a long time to get the signal back.
But like, see,
well,
you don't really...
haven't you seen the dish? There was.
Yeah. They got like a video back.
Yeah.
Well, a video signal from the moon.
Yeah.
In the 60s.
Yeah.
When you couldn't even get good TV reception.
No, but they used completely different technologies.
Anyway, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things like that like you kind of just have to go, okay, yeah, I accept it, right? Like, I don't really know. It's above my pay grade.
Yeah, but there's heaps of things you have to accept.
It'd be more believable for me if they literally got it on the 70th try. And, like, literally, I mean, think about it this way, man. More people died building the Sydney Harbour fucking bridge than died going to the moon.
Yeah, but they were never going to go to the moon if they didn't think they could do it.
But you don't know what's going to happen. Like, science is still trial and error. You can't, like, fucking do this Hail Mary pass and get it done, right? Like, it's unbelievable. Some things are unbelievable. I've made peace with that. But I'm just saying that if you just think it all makes sense, then you just haven't thought about it enough.
I think they took risks that you wouldn't take today. So I think
especially with white pilots.
Like, it took the Cold War and it took the notion of, like, having supremacy over the USSR. And, they call it a moonshot for a reason, right? It took that kind of thinking to make it happen. And that kind of thinking required, like, trade-offs between our usual like risk protocols don't apply here, and we're going to like do things that we wouldn't do in other situations. But
so not one manned spaceship shuttle launch missed the moon or crashed into the moon or just petered out in space. It's just like as soon as we got out of the atmosphere,
Mercury astronauts died trying to, so it's not the case that there weren't mistakes and errors.
But they blew up within atmospheric.
Yeah, but so
as soon as we get out of like view, we somehow make it all the way to the moon and land and back.
Well, it can be that once, like, it's thresholds, right? So distance is not the metric of difficulty. Like the metric of difficulty is like launching out of our atmosphere is 90% of the difficulty, and then the difference between being in our kind of immediate, I don't know what the right terms are, but our immediate atmosphere versus like beyond to moon is only the extra 10% of the difficulty. Like it's not linear, right, to distance. And again, like you hit the nail on the head when you said like you've got to outsource you've just got to take some things as like a given, right? And absolutely, I'm doing that. Like I don't know what the scientific like technical challenges are, but again, it would come like for me comes back to the fundamental question being that like, could you get 1,000, and there would have been 100,000 people involved, but could you even get 1,000 people to like not cheat and say like, Andy, for one of that 1,000 say it was like all a hoax, right?
Andy, they had a crew of like 1,000 people working on the television show Lost, and they kept the secret of the ending from all of those people. So it is possible.
But seriously though, like there are no credible figures connected to the program saying it's a hoax, despite like quite incredible incentives to do so if it were a hoax. So anyway, let's move on. We recently did an episode on 9/11. So 9/11 Inside Job. Various guests, including architect Richard Gage, have discussed theories that the September 11 attacks were orchestrated or allowed to happen by elements within the US government to justify military interventions and increased surveillance.
Do I think that governments work in subversive ways to trigger certain outcomes, to either go to war or to plan insurrections and all sorts of things? Yes, and there have been documented cases of America doing just that through CIA manipulations in South America and a range of places. So let's just start off the conversation by saying that not only are the motives there, but there is actual documented evidence of this kind of thing. Now, would I ever think that 9/11 was an inside job? No, and I have never thought about that. But I did want to start off by saying it is not a crazy thought to think that the US government and other governments work in these ways to plan kind of military actions.
Come on, it is a crazy thought. It's a fucking crazy thought.
As I said 9/11 specifically, but like I said, there are...
It's fucking crazy. There's quite a distinction to be made about like a CIA ops mission in Colombia.
MK Ultra?
And let's knock down 2 buildings and the Pentagon, and we'll fly a plane into our own like military headquarters to like scare the shit out of Americans just so we can like go and like invade Afghanistan. Like, come on, that doesn't make sense. That's nuts.
No, I'm with you. I'm just
so, and this is maybe part of the problem with conspiracy thinking is there can be like a conflation of like extremes, like of like there's an essence of something that happens and is realistic and is within the realms of possibility, and that can then, well, if they're willing to do that thing, then like, oh, they might be willing to do this other thing. But like, come on, there's no way, like, take the facts of the actual 9/11 case to one side and the evidence or lack thereof of it being an inside job. But like, there's no way there's any incentives or it relates to anything remotely that the US government has done before or would do.
I agree. But I mean, I was just kind of laying out that governments do operate in subversive ways. I'm not saying that 9/11 is one of them, but I mean, even look at what's the organization that listens to everyone?
The NSA.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a whole episode there about like the leaks that happened in there and the fact that it was conspiracy thinking to think that they were surveilling private citizens in this particular way. And the government shouldn't always be given a free card to be trusted.
So I think the truth element to this particular conversation is that what happens is governments have bad things happen to their country, and then they use them and they leverage them to do things that they want to do that maybe don't align necessarily with the best response to a problem, but they, don't let a crisis go to waste, right? And I think that's kind of what happened with 9/11. And so, but that's quite different for me. Like,
but see, again, this goes back to our initial introduction to this, that you have this view that there are no bad actors.
I don't have a view that there aren't bad actors. I just trust that institutions are best placed to restrict the freedom and the ability of bad actors to do bad things, right?
All right, let's talk about one other thing. What's your view on the charge of weapons of mass destruction and the invasion of Iraq?
There was a lot of people within government, and I say government to be quite broadly conceived, including the Australian government for that matter, who sincerely believed there were weapons of mass destruction. However, I also believe that those people who sincerely believed there were, weapons of mass destruction also
WMDs.
They also kind of were tied to it and didn't do their due diligence, because in the sense that like their fates were tied to there being WMDs, such that like they needed plausible. I mean, it's legit a thing, and you say I don't believe in bad actors. I actually don't think that's true of my view. It's legitimately a thing that people in political offices and like political leaders legit like don't want their staff to tell them certain things because they need plausible deniability. They need to be able to say, I was never told that. I don't know about that. My office didn't brief me on that. And that's a thing. And that's like a deliberate strategy that's used. And that's the same here with WMDs. It was like, well, yes, I've been advised there's WMDs, but I'm not going to ask you to go and play devil's advocate and find all the evidence contrary to that view, right? Like I've got a report that from some respected institution that tells me, like gives me enough basis to like form that view. So I think there was a little bit of like wishful thinking, and in the end it wasn't, right?
All right. Let's move to the next one.
All right. Big Pharma suppressing cures. Guests like Dr. Rhonda Patrick and Graham Hancock have raised concerns about the pharmaceutical industry suppressing natural or alternative treatments for diseases like cancer, arguing that the industry prioritizes profit over public health.
I believe this. I believe that the motives are set up to promote this kind of behavior, and that there are a long list of, let's call it unethical behavior from Big Pharma. And they're incredibly powerful. And if you look at the funding breakdown, even for this current election, but the elections over the last, 20, 30 years, the pie chart of both Big Pharma lobbies and donations are absolutely staggering. And they're not giving this money away without getting something in return, right? And that's not even to talk about all the settled lawsuits in the billions for malpractice around actual, pain and stuff caused and deaths caused by certain prescription drugs, the opioid epidemic and all that kind of business. I do believe that. Now, suppressing cures for certain things, that might be a bridge too far, that they actually know about something and they're holding it back. But I think that the ethics of like Big Pharma and all the motives at play and the incentives and the economics are a recipe for disaster. And especially in the States where they have different regulations around this stuff.
So the pharmaceutical industry is, it's a business, it responds to incentives, and they work within the system that they're given, and they put resources behind things that make money, and they don't put resources behind things that don't make money. So it's not surprising that they invest in like chronic diseases and things like treatments that are going to give them regular paychecks, and that they're not going to invest much money in cures. suppressing cures, I think, is like, that's, again, like you, I think that's a stretch. I don't think they found the, like,
we still have Steve Jobs.
I don't think they found the cure for cancer, and they're just sitting on it because, like, they haven't worked out how to monetize it yet. And like,
ivermectin all over again.
But the good thing about like innovation generally is that there's like a financial incentive to innovation, but there's also like a lot of people who genuinely like want to do the right thing and come up with good ideas. Like they also want to, like, if they can't get it through like a major company, they'll take it, or they'll create their own buzz about their product. And so it does happen, but of course it's like an investment thing. Like, where do they invest? But you know what? Do you know whose fault that is? It's not it's not farmers. It's not big farmers' like fault. It's the fault of like systems. It's the fault of government policy.
This one I'm with you too, and I know, sorry, I'm mischaracterizing you a little bit, but I do not believe there's like evil people here. I think it's just, like you said, a systemic thing. They are working, trying to paint within the lines of and take the highest advantage of the system that they have, which includes political donations and lobbying and advertising and all this kind of stuff, right? So yeah, I think it's just a symptom of where there's money, All
right. Number 4, UFOs.
Classic.
With guests like Bob Lazar and Jeremy Corbell, Joe Rogan has delved into the conspiracy that the US government is hiding evidence of extraterrestrial life, advanced technology, and UFO sightings, often focusing on Area 51 and classified military encounters.
I think there's been a real culture change when it comes to UFOs. I feel like when we were growing up, right, this was X-Files shit. That if you were someone who actually believed in UFOs, you were just like either attracted to the kind of crazy supernatural culture, like maybe you believed in ghosts and things as well, and spirits and stuff, and you were kind of like a counterculture person. Now, because of, like, I feel like there's been a change where actually it's okay to hold a different view without being in that counterculture fringe. And maybe it's because of like this whole, understanding the cosmos more and the fact that there's an infinite amount of stars out there and planets and things. And actually, it probably does make sense from a probability thinking that there is other life, intelligent life out there in the universe, because we're talking about like infinite scales and potentially even leaving the door open for things like the multiverse and different things like that science has started to bring to the mainstream. So I think that now it's a bit more acceptable to believe in aliens, right? Maybe not little green men aliens, but alien life forms. And the other thing that's caused a real change is the declassification of a lot of these UFOs, right? And a lot of prominent, credible, I would say, military personnel that have come out talking about their experiences. I do think there's been a real sea change in this, and I feel like it's starting to kind of come out a little bit from the shadows. The way I look at it is there's obviously something there. There's I 100% believe that they have experienced things or are in possession of things that they have not told the public. Now, whether that means it's UFOs or something else or whatever other elements that they've collected or things, for whatever reason they've chosen not to be honest with the public about it. Maybe it's due to national security reasons or whatever it is. Maybe there's like a military aspect, but that's what I believe. That's the extent of how far I'm willing to go into this conspiracy space.
All right, so there's 2 parts to this. One is the philosophy of are we alone in the universe, and then you can almost just pull out pen and paper and do some mathematical equations to figure that out in the probability. Even then, subparts of that is one will we ever make contact? And I think the probabilities that we will ever make contact are very, very slim. But that's a different question to are they out there somewhere? But not to get sidetracked on that. Then to the next bit about practical experience of UFOs in the more generic unidentified flying object sense, as opposed to aliens. The one thing you don't get many reports of nowadays, you don't get many reports of the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot. When you do, I guess you do get some, but a lot more reports of aliens, right? It seems, in UFOs. So it does seem like there's something going on. I think it's relevant that most of them seem to be in America. So I think it's relevant that they're concentrated in a certain location on this planet, as opposed to you don't tend to get them in the UK or Australia or Western Europe. They're in America, right? And equally that America happens to be a pretty significant military, the most advanced military power on the planet. So I think there's something going on, but I don't know what it is.
That's also one of the theories that actually they are visiting military targets.
Well, there's something going on. I don't know what it is. I think it's less likely to be like Little Green Men, a flying saucer that, some of those movies with that really bad, I don't know, vinyls, kind of suit of the alien or whatever. I think it's probably like
an anal probing.
I think there's some sort of spacecraft that they've cooked up that like flying craft they've cooked up that they're not sharing with anyone.
About time.
All right. Well, on that number 4, I think we need to move to a cheerier note, a happier note. Joe Rogan and guests such as Whitney Webb and Tim Dillon have discussed Jeffrey Epstein's alleged connections with powerful figures and secretive networks, suggesting that Epstein's death was not a suicide and that he was involved in a global elite pedophilia ring covered up by influential people. I got to say, I'll jump in first. Of all these, this is the most likely to be true.
I think this is quite a timely one now because of the whole P. Diddy sexual abuse ring slowly unfolding or crashing down like a house of cards. It's like and the weird thing about this one is I don't even think this is like a good example of how power distorts things, right? It's like people in the entertainment industry know, like they knew about Harvey Weinstein. They kind of knew about Epstein and his taste for young women. There was even reports that they knew about Cosby, right? And all these things, right? These rings, or these Kevin Spacey was a well-known thing, right? In his theater. And I think power has this ability to distort the story, the narrative, and subvert that from the general public for a long time, even though many, many people know. So I think this one is a good example of like when there's smoke, there's fire, and when the motivations are right, like there are deviants and bad actors in the world. Now, the bits that are where this goes, like all of that is easy to understand. A powerful man abusing their power to have sexual gratification and exploitation and more power and satisfaction. That's a tale as old as time. That's not actually very surprising to me, and actually in years gone by, it's literally this idea of like how young the women are, right? But the bit that's interesting probably is more this idea that was he intelligence? Was he part of Mossad, right? Was he doing the time-honored tradition of the honeypot strategy of blackmailing people and gaining leverage and all that? Like that part is the interesting part to me, right? Like, and I must say that for something like Epstein, where there is such a wide net of celebrities that have not paid, they have not answered for this stuff, it is very, very unsettling, right? Like there is the little black book there. Do we as the public deserve to know what Bill Clinton did on Epstein's island, in his private planes, in his New York apartments? And the fact that he died in the way he did is very, very real evidence that it was murder, right? Because of the leverage that he held over very powerful people, over his 20-year career of filming them have sex with underage women or whatever, right? Like I just think that part makes you understand what's at play here with power dynamics, right? I've got no doubt in my mind that he was murdered to keep himself to keep certain realities from coming out.
I mean, that's a pretty strong statement, though. Like, no doubt in your mind.
No doubt in my mind.
I mean, I would flip it and say it's possible. It's quite possible, but I wouldn't say no doubt. I mean, that's
man. If it quacks like a duck,
it's a pretty
waddles like a duck.
I mean,
circumstantial. He had hemorrhaging in his eyes.
It's a circumstantial
consistent
case.
with being strangled. There should have been. It was a one time where he didn't have his cellmate there. Both cameras in the Supermax they were in somehow were malfunctioning at the same times. The guards that were watching were asleep. They fell asleep, so they couldn't give any testimony.
Yeah, but I think
I've watched Making a Murderer.
That's all evidence of like that's consistent with it being murder. but it's not evidence that it was murder. And that's what's missing. So, as I said, I think this is the one that, and just as an aside, like forget like the actual suicide or murder or whatever we're deeming it to be. I think there's no doubt in my mind, for me to be as sure as you on this, that all of these celebrities are fucking dodgy as, in terms of them pushing the envelope on what's like acceptable, in terms of the appetite for this kind of stuff. And, I think we have to remember that when you're powerful and you're a celebrity, you get things that the rest of us don't get. Like you get used to a certain lifestyle, and that includes, there's no shortage of rock stars from the 70s, basically, where they agree that they basically committed what would be rape nowadays. Like in terms of, the girl being underage, right? I'm talking like 14-year-olds. So
statutory rape.
Yeah. So this stuff kind of happens, and it's of no surprise to me that people who could facilitate that kind of stuff from people who were used to getting it had a role to play. And the world has moved on, but some people have not moved on. And there's a gap, and that's where the people like Epstein.
Why hasn't the Black Book come out?
I think it kind of has in a way, hasn't it?
Not really.
Well, I mean, there's enough kind of high-profile people who've been sort of named and shamed, I think.
But not in a meaningful way. Like Bill Clinton. Focus on him for a second.
Well, I mean, your presumption is there is some extra salacious story, and I guess that's not necessarily the case, right? It could just be that he went to an island for a holiday. Maybe there was a perception of financial.
He wasn't a horny old man, was he? That's totally disincongruous with his character.
Yeah, but like I think.
And he again lied about it.
But you can't say
lied
that.
About it.
Yeah. But these things are very complicated, because when you're associated with someone like Jeffrey Epstein, you want to sort of downplay your association with him, right? And I think, let's say Bill Clinton did nothing other than, court him as a donor, a political donor, and attend his island as like a bit of a chore to elicit the donations. And, it's a holiday at the same time. If it's that scenario, it's going to look exactly the same, isn't it? So, and this is the problem with conspiracy theories, right? Is that can't prove them because they're circumstantial.
Release the Black Book.
All right. Well, all right. Over and out.
Till next time.